My name is Eliza, and I am 28 years old. My great-aunt Lara was eccentric and rich. Think pearls at breakfast and talking to her parrot like he was royalty. My cousin spent years sucking up to her, bringing her flowers, fake smiles, and forced laughter. But Aunt Lara wasn't a fool. She saw right through them. I was the only one who visited just to talk. We'd drink tea and discuss her favorite novels, gossip about the neighbors, and sometimes just sit quietly in her vast old library. I never expected anything from her. Maybe that's why she liked me. Aunt Lara passed away, and her death had already left me emotionally tangled. She wasn't just a relative. She had been my confidant, my strange, charming escape from the dull, predictable world outside her mansion gates. When I was little, she used to let me play with her antique dolls and tell me stories about her travels, how she'd danced in Venice, argued with poets in Paris, and once owned a tiger, though that last one I never quite believed. Her house itself was a character. Creaky floors, rooms filled with old books and stranger artifacts, and that ever-present smell of lavender and dust. I still remembered how the light used to fall through the tall stained glass windows, splashing colors across her parrot's golden cage. Captain, the parrot, had always been there, squawking and muttering half-phrases that only Alara seemed to understand. As children, my cousins and I would visit her together. They'd pretend to adore her, but I could see their eyes scanning the jewelry, the paintings, the silver trays, calculating. They never cared for her stories or her laughter. They cared for her wealth. I think she knew it all along. I remember her telling me once, "Money brings out the real feathers in people, darling. Some shine and some molt." At the time, I had giggled, but now, sitting in that will reading room, I understood exactly what she meant. When the lawyer started reading the will, I could feel the tension thickening. My cousins leaned forward, almost trembling with greed. Their eyes gleamed like predators waiting to pounce on the spoils. I sat back, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't expect anything, truly I didn't. Aunt Alara had done enough for me in life. She'd paid for part of my education when my parents couldn't. She'd written me letters full of wisdom and wit, and she believed in me when no one else did. That was inheritance enough. But when the lawyer's voice trembled slightly and he said, "To my family, I leave my disappointment," I felt the air leave the room. My cousin's smiles froze. One of them actually gasped. It was the kind of silence that has weight, a silence you could almost hear breaking. Then he continued. To her parrot, "Captain, I leave my entire $10 million estate to be managed by his designated caretaker." He paused, and I could hear the ticking of his pocket watch, the creak of the chair as someone shifted impatiently. Then, with a faint cough, he said, "My grandniece, Eliza." I swear the world tilted for a moment. My name echoed in my ears, distant and unreal. I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. My cousins, on the other hand, didn't take a moment to breathe. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, angry, sharp, desperate. "This is absurd. She can't do that." A parrot. One cousin stood up so fast his chair toppled. Another slammed her hand on the table, demanding explanations. The lawyer tried to calm them, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of disbelief. I sat still, the papers on the table blurring before my eyes. A parrot. A bird. $10 million. It was surreal. I wasn't rich. I worked part-time, rented a small apartment, lived a quiet life. And now, suddenly, I was the caretaker of a feathered millionaire. But beneath the shock, a strange sadness crept in. Aunt Alara, in her typical mischievous way, had orchestrated the perfect chaos, even after death. She'd turned her will into a final lesson, a game only she could invent. When the shouting finally subsided, everyone looked at me as though I'd stolen something. Their eyes burned with envy and accusation. I wanted to say I hadn't known, that I didn't want any of this, but the words wouldn't come. The lawyer pushed the papers toward me with a hesitant nod, his face tight with discomfort. That night, as I left the office, the city lights blurred through my tears. I wasn't crying out of joy or guilt. I was crying because I missed her. I missed her laugh, her wit, her warmth. The money meant nothing to me. But being chosen, being trusted by her, even in death, meant everything. And as I drove toward her empty mansion, the image of that old parrot perched on his stand filled my mind. Captain, her closest companion, her confidant. Maybe he held more secrets than I could imagine. Little did I know that strange bird was about to speak words that would change everything. That night, I stayed at Aunt Alara's mansion. The place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. Dust floated in the air like time refusing to settle. I sat in the study, the will still echoing in my head. The mansion had always felt like another world, a place where time forgot to move. That night, with the moonlight spilling through the high-arched windows, the silence pressed on me from every side. The chandeliers above me were draped with cobwebs, their crystals glinting faintly like ghostly tears. I could almost hear the echo of Aunt Alara's laughter in the hallways, her silk dresses brushing against the polished floor. Her study was my favorite room, the same one where she used to sit in her velvet chair, reading for hours while Captain nibbled on her spectacles. The air still smelled faintly of her perfume, that distinct blend of roses and sandalwood. It clung to the drapes, to the old furniture, to the very air I breathed. I had spent so many evenings there with her, sipping tea, listening to her stories about love, betrayal, art, and travel. She was like a living storybook, full of secrets, full of contradictions. And now, she was gone, leaving behind only this echoing emptiness and a parrot who looked at me as if he knew something I didn't. Captain's cage stood near the grand piano, though the door was always open. He had never needed to be confined. He was too clever for that. His feathers gleamed even in the dim light, and when I looked into his eyes, I felt that uncanny intelligence staring right back. Well, Captain, I sighed, half talking to myself. What now? For a few seconds, there was only the sound of the old clock ticking, slow and steady. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the way the air thickened, heavy with stillness. And then, third book. Vanity Fair, he cried suddenly, his voice sharp and startling in the silence. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. My breath hitched in my throat. Aunt Alara's voice used to echo through this room, giving Captain new words to mimic. But this felt different. It was as if she had left me one final message through him. I stood slowly, my chair scraping lightly against the Persian rug. My eyes went to the bookshelf that dominated the far wall, floor to ceiling, crammed with hundreds of books. Some were classics, some rare editions, some that probably hadn't been touched in decades. My hand trembled as I reached for the shelf. My eyes scanned the spines, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Vanity Fair. The third book from the left. I hesitated for a second, my pulse drumming in my ears. Then I reached out and pulled it free. It was lighter than it should have been. The weight was all wrong. A chill ran through me. I turned it over in my hands, the old leather cover soft and worn. The gold lettering on the spine was faded, but still elegant. Aunt Alara had loved Vanity Fair. I remembered her reading it aloud once, laughing softly at Becky's sharp schemes. Every woman, she'd said, should learn the art of playing her own game. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was making me play mine. I opened the book carefully. The pages didn't flutter, they were stuck together. My fingertips felt a faint ridge along the inner edge. I tugged, and suddenly the pages lifted like a false lid. My breath caught. The book was hollow. Inside, nestled snugly in the carved-out space, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was dark brown, the leather cracked with age, tied shut with a thin ribbon that looked as if it might snap if I pulled too hard. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I didn't know why, but I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. This was no random hiding place. Aunt Alara had left it here for someone, perhaps for me. Behind me, Captain shifted on his perch. "Good girl," he murmured, almost softly this time, as if approving of what I had done. The sound sent shivers through me. My fingers hovered over the journal. Part of me wanted to open it right then and there, but another part, some deep, instinctive part hesitated. What if this was something I wasn't meant to find yet? What if it changed everything I thought I knew about her? I glanced around the room. The walls seemed to lean in closer, the paintings watching silently, the shadows dancing like they knew her secret too. The whole house felt alive with her memory. I sank into her armchair, holding the journal in both hands. My heart thudded as I ran my thumb along its edge. There was something both terrifying and comforting about it, like holding a part of her soul. I looked up at Captain. He tilted his head, eyes bright, wings rustling slightly. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I whispered. He gave a low squawk, then began preening his feathers, utterly unconcerned, as if he had already played his part in whatever game Analera had left behind. I couldn't help but smile, through the fear and the wonder. Analera had never done anything by accident. Every word, every gift, every mystery had a purpose. And I had the distinct feeling that she had planned this, too, that she had left one final trail for me to follow. And it all began with her clever parrot and a hollow book named Vanity Fair. The room seemed to spin around me for a moment, my heart thudding so loudly it drowned out the ticking of the clock. My hands trembled as I clutched the journal tighter, afraid that if I let go, it would vanish like some fragile dream. The leather felt warm under my palms, as though the ink within was still alive, still pulsing with Analera's fierce, clever energy. It was Analera's handwriting, sharp, elegant, unmistakable. I opened the journal and started to read. Her handwriting carried her voice. Each letter, each deliberate curve of her pen felt like she was speaking to me again, wry, precise, sharp as glass. She had always had that kind of mind, strategic, observant, and quietly ruthless when she needed to be. And now, I could see it reflected in every line she had written. The first entry began almost gently, as though she were telling a story. October 17th, 2014. Edmund tried again today. He came with that fake smile and the bottle of wine I know he can't afford, pretending it was a gift. He asked about my health, about my medications. He thinks I don't notice how he writes things down when I speak. Foolish boy. I let him build his little case. I know the kind of snake I raised. I could almost hear her saying it, her voice calm, slightly amused, as if she were playing a game of chess with her own family. I turned the page. There were dozens of entries like that. Some longer, some shorter, all written with the same biting clarity. My cousins, the same ones who had screamed at the will reading, had been scheming for years, each trying to outwit the others, each believing Analera too old, too distracted, too eccentric to notice. But she had noticed. She had noticed everything. There were notes about their visits, about stolen trinkets, about fake flattery, about letters from lawyers they thought she'd never see. She'd even recorded overheard conversations, complete with dates and the exact words spoken. One entry mentioned how one cousin, Clara, had tried to bribe the housekeeper for information about the estate's finances. Another detailed how Thomas had forged Analera's signature on a minor check once, thinking she'd never catch it. She had caught it all, and she had written it down. As I read, a slow, cold realization spread through me. This wasn't just a diary. It was evidence. Proof. Power. Analera had always told me that knowledge was the sharpest weapon, and now I understood why. She hadn't left behind jewels or gold. She had left behind the means to destroy the lies her family had built around her. By the time I reached the middle of the journal, my hands were shaking. The ink on some pages was darker, as if pressed harder into the paper, her anger, her disappointment captured in every line. One entry read, "They think I'm alone, that I'm confused. But I am simply watching, waiting. When the time comes, I'll make sure they see themselves clearly for once." I felt a lump rise in my throat. She had known exactly what they were capable of. Maybe that's why she'd left everything to a parrot. Maybe she had wanted them to reveal their true selves, to fight, to claw, to expose their greed for everyone to see. And in the middle of all of it, she had chosen me. When I reached the last page, my eyes blurred with tears. There, in her graceful handwriting, was the message that would change everything. The bird's money is a trap, dear. Let them fight over it. This journal is your inheritance. Use it. I reread those words over and over. They glowed with a kind of wisdom and affection only she could have expressed. I could almost picture her writing it, alone in her study, Captain perched on her shoulder, her lips curved in that sly, knowing smile. She had always believed that truth could outlast anything, greed, deceit, even death. And now, she had placed that truth in my hands like a weapon wrapped in velvet. I leaned back in the armchair, the journal pressed against my chest. $10 million suddenly felt meaningless. That wasn't the real fortune. Aunt Alara's wealth had never been about money. It had been her mind, her wit, her defiance against the shallow, desperate people who had surrounded her. And she had entrusted me with the legacy of that defiance. I looked up slowly, my eyes landing on Captain. The parrot was watching me closely, his head cocked to one side, his feathers ruffling slightly, as if he could sense my thoughts. "Good girl," he murmured softly, his voice startlingly gentle. The words sent a shiver down my spine. She used to say that to me all the time, when I solved one of her riddles, when I made her tea just the way she liked it, when I'd surprise her with a visit. It wasn't just the parrot speaking. It was her echo, her approval carried on through him. I smiled through the tears that had finally escaped. "You miss her too, don't you, Captain?" I whispered. He blinked once, slow and deliberate, then fluffed his feathers and turned toward the window, gazing into the night. The moonlight gleamed on his gray plumage, and for a fleeting second, I could almost believe that Aunt Alara's spirit lingered there, watching over both of us. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Yet it didn't feel empty anymore. The air seemed charged, alive with purpose. I looked back down at the journal resting on my lap. Every word written in it was a key to understanding her final act. The will, the money, the parrot, none of it had been random. It was all part of her design. She had wanted me to discover the truth myself, to step into her world of careful observation and quiet control. She had prepared me for it without me even realizing. Every conversation we'd ever had, every cryptic remark, every lesson about people and their motives, it had all been leading to this moment. And I finally understood. The fortune wasn't meant for the greedy. The real inheritance wasn't measured in currency. It was measured in clarity. Aunt Alara had handed me the truth on paper, written in her steady hand, and wrapped it in trust. And now it was up to me what to do with it. I traced my fingers over the last line again, whispering it aloud. "The bird's money is a trap, dear. Let them fight over it." Captain gave a low, approving whistle, as if agreeing. I took a deep breath, the kind that steadies your soul before something big. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this much. Aunt Alara had left me more than an inheritance. She had left me her voice, her strength, her strategy. And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear her laughter, soft and triumphant, whispering through the house, "Let the games begin." The next morning, the mansion was buzzing. My cousins had arrived, armed with a new lawyer, determined to contest the will. They were smug, confident that they'd win. When I woke that morning, sunlight was filtering through the lace curtains, soft and golden. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the scent of old wood and lavender hit me, and the events of the previous night came rushing back. The journal, the secrets, the message. I sat up in bed, still holding that sense of awe and disbelief that had wrapped around me like a second skin. Downstairs, the faint hum of voices drifted through the halls. I recognized them instantly, sharp, impatient, and full of false charm. My cousins. They didn't even wait a full day before descending on the mansion like vultures. I could practically hear the click of their expensive shoes on the marble floor, the rustle of papers in their lawyer's briefcase, the practiced tones of feigned civility. I took my time getting ready. If Aunt Alara had taught me anything, it was that poise was power. I brushed my hair slowly, pinned it up neatly, and dressed in one of the soft blouses she'd given me years ago. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, like roses and rebellion. As I walked down the grand staircase, Captain watched me from his perch at the end of the hall. His eyes gleamed, his feathers puffed up. "Visitors," he croaked knowingly. "Yes, I know," I murmured. "Our little show begins." In the drawing room, my cousins were already waiting. Their expressions shifted the moment I entered, from smug amusement to cold calculation. Clara, the eldest, gave me that sweet smile she reserved for manipulation. "Eliza," she said smoothly, "we thought we'd clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding before it goes too far." "Unfortunate misunderstanding," I echoed with a polite smile. That's one way to describe Aunt Alara's will. They exchanged glances, trying to read me, to see if I was scared or uncertain. I wasn't. The journal lay heavy in my hands, a quiet weight of truth. Their lawyer, a sharp-faced man in a navy suit, cleared his throat. "Miss Eliza, I'm sure you understand that this situation is legally questionable. A parrot inheriting $10 million? Surely, that was not your aunt's true intention." I gestured toward the large mahogany table in the center of the room. "Please," I said softly. "Sit. Let's talk." They did, all of them, Clara, Thomas, Edmund, and their polished lawyer. Captain fluttered to his perch by the window, watching with curious eyes. His presence filled the room with an almost eerie awareness, as if he understood every word. I set the leather-bound journal on the table. My fingers rested lightly on its cover. "Before we begin," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough edge to make them shift uneasily, "I'd like to read a few passages." They laughed. Nervous, mocking laughter. Clara leaned back in her chair. "Eliza, honestly, you're going to read us bedtime stories now." But their laughter faltered as soon as I opened the journal. The first few lines I read were enough to silence them completely. Dates, names, amounts. Every deceit laid bare in Alara's clear, scathing handwriting. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded with each word. I could feel the tension thickening in the air, could see the color draining from their faces. Thomas stared at the table, his jaw tight. Clara's fake composure cracked, her fingers clenching around her skirt. I turned another page and read about the bribes, the forgery, the petty thefts they thought no one had noticed. The lawyer's expression shifted from confidence to unease as he realized the gravity of what was being revealed. Each entry was a dagger of truth, slicing through their pretenses. I didn't embellish or accuse. I simply read. Aunt Alara had already done all the work, meticulous, undeniable, devastating. By the time I closed the journal, the silence was absolute. No one spoke. Even Captain stayed still, as if sensing the weight of that moment. The air felt heavy, suffocating, almost electric. I could feel all their eyes on me, some angry, some frightened, all defeated. I smiled softly, not with cruelty, but with understanding. Aunt Alara always said the truth was the most valuable treasure, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Now I see what she meant. Clara's lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. Edmund shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting toward the door. Thomas muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch. Their lawyer cleared his throat, but didn't say a word. He knew there was nothing left to defend. Captain broke the silence with a sharp whistle. "Smart girl," he squawked, his voice bright and triumphant. I couldn't help it, I laughed. For the first time in days, I laughed freely, the sound echoing through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't the laugh of victory over them, it was the laugh of realization. Because in that moment, I finally understood. Aunt Alara hadn't left me money. She'd left me power, freedom, and the last laugh. The freedom to live without fear of them. The power to protect her memory, her truth, and myself. And the last laugh, a quiet one, the kind she would have appreciated, because she had orchestrated everything so perfectly that her plan continued working even after she was gone. My cousins left not long after, their pride deflated, their lawyer mumbling something about needing to review the situation. They avoided my eyes as they walked out. I stood by the window, watching their cars disappear down the long driveway. Captain fluttered to my shoulder, his claws light but grounding. "Good girl," he murmured again, softer this time, almost tender. I turned my head and smiled. "We did it, Captain," I whispered. The mansion felt different now, lighter, brighter, no longer haunted by tension or greed. Sunlight poured into the drawing room, warming the pages of the journal that still lay open on the table. Aunt Alara's spirit lingered, not as a ghost, but as a quiet presence in the laughter, in the light, in the bird who still carried her words. And as I stood there, with the truth finally free and my heart unburdened, I knew that her last lesson had settled deep inside me. Money fades, lies crumble, but truth endures. And that, I thought, was the real inheritance.